Imagine it's 1966. You're in a crowded theater. The lights dim, and suddenly, a scene flashes across the screen that leaves the entire front row breathless. No warnings, no R ratings, just raw, unfiltered cinema. Before the MPAA strictly policed every frame, there was a window where filmmakers pushed the boundaries of decency right under the noses of the moral police. Tonight, we're looking at 10 times Hollywood, and the world showed us exactly what freedom of expression meant before the rules were written in stone. Number 10. Blowup, 1966. The movie that broke the code. Directed by the legendary Michelangelo Antonioni, Blowup is a masterpiece of swinging London cool, but its real legacy is being the film that officially killed the Hays Code. It stars David Hemmings as a cynical, high-fashion photographer who believes he's accidentally captured a murder on film while wandering through Marylabone's Marion Park. For the censors of the mid-60s, the mystery wasn't the problem, it was the lifestyle. The film featured a playful, romp-filled scene involving two aspiring models, one of whom was a young Jane Birkin, that included full frontal nudity. At the time, this was a massive no-go. The Production Code Administration refused to give the film a seal of approval. In the old days, that would have been the end of it. But the studio, MGM, did something revolutionary. They released it through a shell company called Premiere Productions without a rating. It was a gamble that paid off. Audiences didn't stay away, they flocked to it. It became a cultural phenomenon, grossing $20 million on a tiny budget. When you watch it today, you aren't just watching a thriller. You're watching the exact moment the moral police realized they had lost their grip on the American public. Number 9. Adult themes. Number 8. Barbarella, 1968. The Queen of Outer Space and the Birth of a Pinup. If the Pawnbroker was about the head, Barbarella was about the heart, and everything else. This was the peak of 1960s psychedelic sci-fi, starring Jane Fonda as a space-traveling agent tasked with finding a scientist named Duran Durand. But let's be honest, the plot was just a vehicle for the visuals. The opening credits are etched into the memory of every man who was there in '68. As Fonda floats through the cabin of her plush, fur-lined spaceship, she slowly peels out of her silver spacesuit in a zero-gravity striptease. It was incredibly clever. Since she was floating, her hair and the camera angles managed to keep just enough hidden to avoid an outright ban, but it left absolutely nothing to the imagination. Produced by Dino De Laurentiis, the film was a wild mix of camp, eroticism, and high fashion, with costumes designed by Paco Rabanne. It arrived just months before the MPAA officially switched to the letter rating system, GMRX. Barbarella occupied that perfect sweet spot in time, where the old rules were being ignored and the new rules weren't yet enforced. It was unapologetic. It was fun. And Jane Fonda became the undisputed face of the sexual revolution in cinema. Number 7. Psych-Out, 1968. The Summer of Love captured on celluloid. Before he was the Joker or the Easy Rider, a young, lean Jack Nicholson was tearing up the screen in this psychedelic trip through San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district. The story follows a deaf runaway named Jenny, Susan Strasberg, who arrives in the city looking for her lost brother, only to be taken in by a band of hippies living the free love dream. This film is a fascinating time capsule because it wasn't filmed on a Hollywood backlot. It was shot on the actual streets during the height of the counterculture movement. To keep it authentic, the director included scenes of communal living and skinny dipping that pushed the boundaries of what a mainstream movie could show. The censors were baffled. They were looking for the usual suggestive dialogue, but they weren't prepared for the casual, non-sexualized way the film treated nudity as part of the nature-loving hippie lifestyle. It slipped through because it felt like a documentary of a social revolution that the old guard censor simply didn't understand. It's a raw, grainy, and vibrant look at a time when the youth were tearing up the rulebook in real time. Number 6. Garden of Eden, 1954. The educational loophole. Long before the 60s revolution, there was Garden of Eden, a film that pulled off one of the greatest sleights of hand in cinema history. In the mid-50s, the Hays Code was absolute, and nudity was strictly forbidden. However, the producers found a genius loophole. They framed the entire movie as a health and nature documentary about a nudist resort. The plot is paper-thin. A widower and his daughter accidentally stumble upon a nudist camp and eventually learn to embrace the lifestyle. Because it was presented as an educational film promoting a wholesome, sun-drenched way of life, it bypassed the local obscenity laws that would have shut down a standard drama. You'd see families playing volleyball and lounging by the pool in their birthday suits. It was a massive hit in independent theaters and even sparked a Supreme Court case in New York. For audiences in the repressed 1950s, this was a shocking glimpse of skin that they literally couldn't see anywhere else, all hidden under the guise of bettering one's health. Number 5. And God Created Woman, 1956. The Brigitte Bardot Explosion. If there is one person who single-handedly destroyed the American concept of decency in the 50s, it was Brigitte Bardot. When this French film arrived on U.S. shores, it didn't just cause a stir, it caused a national crisis. Bardot plays Juliette, a free-spirited, sexually uninhibited orphan in a small fishing village who drives 3 different men to the brink of madness. The American censors went into a frenzy, demanding cuts to the scenes of Bardot dancing wildly in a slit skirt or lounging nude behind a strategically placed sheet. But the distributors were smart. They marketed the foreignness of the film as a sign of sophistication. It became a must-see event for adult men across the country. This movie changed the game because it introduced the European art film as a legitimate way to see things that Hollywood was too scared to film. It wasn't just about the skin, it was about Bardot's absolute, defiant lack of shame, which was more provocative than any nude scene could ever be. It paved the way for every bold actress that followed. Number 4. The Immoral Mr. Tease, 1959. The Rise of the Nudie-Cutie. Long before he became the king of the cult classics, Russ Meyer changed the landscape of independent cinema with this low-budget, high-concept film. In 1959, you couldn't show nudity in a story with serious or dramatic intent, so Meyer took a different route. He made it a comedy. The film follows Mr. Tease, a delivery man who, after receiving a local anesthetic at the dentist, suddenly finds he has X-ray vision that allows him to see every woman he encounters without her clothes. It was silly, it was lighthearted, and it was revolutionary. Because there was no sinister or illicit behavior, just a man looking at women doing mundane things like gardening or typing, Meyer managed to get the film into mainstream theaters. It grossed over $1 million on a $24,000 budget. This film gave birth to the Nudie-Cutie genre, proving to the big Hollywood studios that there was a massive, untapped market of men who were tired of the suggestive teasing of the big screen and wanted to see the real thing. Number 3. Lonesome Cowboys, 1968. The Underground Outlaw. Andy Warhol wasn't just an artist, he was a master at finding the cracks in the system. While Hollywood was still debating what R and X ratings should mean, Warhol was in Arizona filming a satirical western that would make the old-school censors' heads spin. Lonesome Cowboys is a loose, improvised take on Romeo and Juliet, featuring a group of handsome, drifting cowboys and their interactions with a local woman and her nurse. The film featured casual, full nudity and dealt with themes that were decades ahead of their time. Because it was an experimental art film screened in private clubs and specialized art houses, Warhol bypassed the MPAA entirely. However, the authorities weren't amused. The FBI actually kept a file on the production, and the film was seized by police in several cities. It remains a legendary example of the underground cinema of the late 60s, where the goal wasn't just to tell a story, but to see how far the boundaries could be pushed before the law stepped in. Number 2. Zabriskie Point, 1970. A desert mirage of rebellion. Michelangelo Antonioni returned to the spotlight with this big-budget, anti-establishment film that remains one of the most visually stunning movies of the era. Set against a backdrop of student protests and the death of the American dream, the film's centerpiece is a massive, surrealist sequence in Death Valley. After the two protagonists meet in the desert, the film transitions into a visionary sequence where dozens of couples appear across the dunes in a choreographed, peaceful encounter. At the time, the film was under heavy scrutiny. The FBI investigated the production for anti-American sentiment, and local authorities tried to stop the desert filming, claiming it was an orgy. Antonioni stood his ground, claiming the scene was a metaphor for a return to innocence. Because it was a high art production from a major studio, MGM, it carried a prestige that made it harder to censor. It's a film that perfectly captures that 1970 transition. The production values were massive, the themes were radical, and the nudity was treated as a beautiful, natural rebellion against a broken world. Number 1. The Girl on a Motorcycle, 1968. The ultimate icon of the unrestricted era. This is it. The movie that perfectly captured the exact second the old world died and the new anything goes era of cinema was born. Released in 1968, it stars the breathtaking Marianne Faithfull as Rebecca, a young bride who leaves her husband in the middle of the night, zips into a black fur-lined leather jumpsuit, and hammers the throttle of her Harley-Davidson to ride across Europe to find her lover, played by the legendary Alain Delon. But it wasn't just the motorcycle that had people talking. This film was a sensory explosion of free love aesthetics. The most famous fact about this movie is what Marianne Faithfull was wearing. Or rather, what she wasn't wearing. Underneath that iconic skin-tight leather suit, she was completely nude. The film is packed with dreamy, psychedelic sequences and erotic flashbacks that were so bold, they earned the movie the very first X rating ever given to a film in the UK. In the United States, it was released as Naked Under Leather to make sure the audience knew exactly what they were getting into. The censors tried to put up a fight, but the tide had turned. The film's blend of high-speed action, European cool, and raw, unabashed sensuality made it a cult legend. It wasn't just a movie, it was a manifesto for a generation that was done with the Hays Code and ready for the truth. It remains the ultimate symbol of that brief, wild window where the rules didn't exist and the screen was truly free. That's our look back at 10 times the silver screen showed us more than the censors ever intended. These films weren't just about the nudity. They were about the courage to break the mold and the excitement of being in that theater when the rules were finally being shattered. We grew up in a time when cinema felt like a revolution, and these scenes were the front lines. So which one of these left the biggest impression on you? Was it the cool defiance of Blowup or the desert visions of Zabriskie Point? Let's hear your stories in the comments. I know you've got them. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned as we keep digging through the vault of the movies that made us. Until next time, keep it classic.